If you enjoy stories like this, please support me by hitting that subscribe button. It means a lot. I had always known my HOA was nosy, maybe even a little too power-hungry. But I never imagined they'd go this far. See, I own a ranch. It's been in my family for years, quiet, spacious, peaceful. When I moved in full-time, I thought joining the HOA would be a formality. Just some meetings, minor dues, and neighborly rules like trimming bushes and not leaving junk in the yard. That's it. No one mentioned they thought they could take ownership of my land. Or that one day, I'd come home from a trip to find strangers walking across my property with brochures and clipboards. The whole thing started when I left town for a short vacation. Just 4 days. I had to take care of some business and visit my sister who'd had surgery. It wasn't a long trip, and I told a few people around the area that I'd be gone. My neighbor across the road, Mr. Jensen, even agreed to keep an eye on the place. He's retired, watches everything, and I trust him. So I left thinking my ranch was in good hands, or at least safe from random chaos. Turns out, that assumption was way too generous. 2 days into the trip, I got a weird text from Mr. Jensen. He said, "There's a lot of cars parked near your gate. People with notepads walking around. Something feels off." I thought maybe someone took a wrong turn or there was some kind of property inspection. I told him I'd check in later. But something just didn't sit right. A couple hours later, he texted again, this time with a photo. It showed a big white sign on the edge of my fence. I zoomed in and read 4 words that made my heart stop. Ranch property auction today. There was even a time listed, 2 p.m. And guess what time it was when I saw the picture? 1:17 p.m. I didn't hesitate. I told my sister I'd explain later, grabbed my stuff, and left that same evening. I drove through the night, barely stopping, just running on energy drinks and adrenaline. I couldn't believe what I'd seen. I kept checking the photo like it might change. Like somehow my tired eyes had read it wrong. But when I finally pulled into my driveway the next morning, reality hit me even harder. My gravel driveway had tire tracks, multiple. There were chairs set up under tents. The auction sign was still there, and there were even some flyers scattered on the ground. It looked like a full event had taken place. I walked up slowly, jaw clenched. I passed a stack of folders with my street address printed across the front, like I was some foreclosure case. Except I wasn't. My property taxes were paid. My mortgage? Long gone. My HOA dues? On autopay. So what in the world gave them the right? That's when I spotted her. Karen. The self-proclaimed president of the HOA. She was standing on the far end of my fence line, clipboard in hand, talking to some guy in a suit. I started walking toward them. She saw me, froze, and then tried to act casual, like seeing me back home wasn't completely unexpected. I didn't say a word at first. I just stared at her. Then I asked the only question that made sense, why are people holding an auction on my property? Her answer? Well, we posted the notice. As if that explained anything. I told her she had no authority to sell my land. She smirked, flipped through her folder, and said something like, "It's not technically your land if dues are unpaid." That part made me laugh. Out loud. Because I knew for a fact everything was up to date. I asked her for proof. She got flustered, started flipping papers again, then suddenly got defensive. That's when things escalated. She pulled out her phone and said she was calling 911. I thought she was bluffing. But no. She dialed right there in front of me. Said something like, "There's a man on the property refusing to leave. Possibly armed." I stood there, stunned. I was the man on the property. My property. And she was calling the police on me for showing up to stop an illegal auction on my own land. I didn't move. I just stood there, blinking at her in disbelief, while she gave the dispatcher a completely twisted version of what was happening. "Yes, he just appeared out of nowhere," she said. "He's acting aggressive. I think he might be dangerous." Dangerous? The only dangerous thing around here was her fake authority and that clipboard filled with lies. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. I didn't make a single move that could be misread. I simply pulled my wallet from my pocket, took out my ID, and waited for the show to start. It didn't take long. Within 10 minutes, I heard the sound of tires crunching the gravel road that led to my ranch. 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled up, lights flashing but no sirens. Both deputies stepped out slowly, their hands resting on their belts. I kept my hands visible, held up my license, and calmly said, "Before anyone says anything, I'd like to show you proof that I own this property and live here." They looked at me, then at Karen, then back at me. One of them asked, "Do you have any ID with your address on it?" I handed it over, then pointed to the mail in my mailbox with my name on it. I even pulled out a recent tax receipt I kept in my truck's glove box. The deputy looked it over and let out a breath through his nose. "All right," he said, "looks like you're exactly who you say you are." Karen didn't like that. Not one bit. She marched over, waving her stack of papers and shouting about unpaid dues and lien rights. She kept throwing out legal words like foreclosure process and non-compliance penalties, but none of it made sense. I could see the officer trying not to roll his eyes. He asked her one simple question: "Did you file a court order or get legal clearance to seize and auction this property?" She paused. Her mouth opened, then closed. Finally, she muttered something about a board-approved resolution. That's when the deputy shook his head. "Ma'am," he said, "an HOA board can't just vote to take someone's land. That's not how it works." You'd think that would have ended it. But no. Karen wouldn't back down. She kept insisting I owed several months of dues. I asked her to show me where she sent those notices. She flipped to the back of her folder and pointed to a stack of returned mail, every envelope marked undeliverable. That's when I realized what had really happened. She had sent the wrong address. All of it. Wrong zip code, wrong house number. None of the notices had ever reached me. And rather than double-check, she just decided I was in violation. Her solution? Skip due process entirely and hold a public auction. It was unreal. Strangers had been walking across my land, inspecting my barn, peeking inside my shed, all based on a lie. I asked the officers if I could press charges for trespassing, but they said it would be a civil matter unless I had warned them off with signs or fences. Luckily, I had both. My private property signs were still up, and my locked gate had been forced open. That was enough for them to start taking things seriously. One deputy turned to Karen and said, "You might want to stop talking and call your lawyer." Her face drained of color. Meanwhile, I started walking the perimeter, documenting everything. The broken lock. The trampled garden area near the porch. Even tire tracks leading up to my garage. People had really walked around like they had a right to be there. I felt sick, betrayed, and furious. But the craziest part? Some of the potential buyers were still on site, casually chatting like they were at a Sunday market. I approached one of them, a man in a gray vest holding a property brochure with my ranch's photo on the front. I asked him, "Did you know this auction wasn't legal?" He looked surprised, said he assumed everything was above board. He had even brought a deposit check. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a full-on, deliberate attempt to steal my property right from under me while I was gone. The man in the gray vest backed away when I told him the auction was bogus. He looked stunned, flipping the brochure over as if he'd find some kind of hidden fine print that explained the mess. "Karen said it was legit," he mumbled. "She told us the previous owner had abandoned the property." That made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was just so wildly wrong. Abandoned? I had groceries in the fridge, the lights were on timers, and my dog's bowls were still on the porch. Nothing about my ranch screamed abandoned. But that's how far Karen had gone. She'd told complete strangers that I had disappeared and left the property behind. I asked him how many people came to the auction. He said close to a dozen showed up. Some had even walked through the barn and inspected the equipment. I glanced toward my barn and felt my blood boil. That barn held more than just tools. It had family history. My granddad's branding irons, my dad's old saddle, even some letters my mom had written decades ago that I'd kept tucked in a drawer. And now strangers had been poking around in there because Karen decided to play real estate queen while I was out of town. As I walked toward the barn, the damage became clearer. The lock was scratched up like someone had forced it open. A wheelbarrow had been rolled outside and left in the dirt. My tool chest, normally shut tight, had been opened and left half empty. It felt like a robbery disguised as an auction. Not only had they invaded my land, they'd gone through my belongings, possibly even taken things. I started snapping photos of everything, every scratch, every scuff, every sign of intrusion. Meanwhile, Karen was pacing near the patrol cars, still on her phone, probably calling the rest of her board or whoever told her this was a good idea. One of the deputies walked over to me and said, "Look, you've got a solid case here. I suggest filing an official report. This could go beyond civil if anything's been stolen or damaged." I nodded. I wasn't letting this go. Then Mr. Jensen, my neighbor, showed up. He'd seen the patrol cars and came over to check in. When I told him what had happened, he nearly exploded. He'd lived in that neighborhood 20 years and had never seen anything like it. "They actually tried to sell your ranch?" he said, shaking his head. "That woman's lost her damn mind." He pulled out his phone and showed me a video he had taken the day before, rows of chairs lined up, Karen handing out flyers, someone setting up a loudspeaker. It was more than a casual mix-up. It was a full-blown event, complete with refreshments and printed bidding sheets. I was speechless watching the clip. She had gone all in. How she thought she could pull this off legally was beyond me. And then came the cherry on top. One of the buyers who had left earlier drove back up, rolling down his window and holding out a folder. "Hey," he said, "I didn't feel right keeping this. It's the auction packet. I figured you should have it." I took it, flipped through the pages, and couldn't believe what I saw. The packet listed my ranch as bank-owned. It even had made-up documents showing a foreclosure process that never happened. Fake stamps. False signatures. She had forged entire sections to look official. I had no idea whether she did it alone or had help, but either way, this was way bigger than a neighbor dispute. The officers took the packet as evidence. One of them told me they'd be contacting the district attorney's office. Karen, by now, had gone completely quiet. She was standing alone, arms crossed, watching the walls close in. Whatever scam she thought she was running, it had just come crashing down. And I was just getting started. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not after everything she'd done. Not after the lies, the forged papers, and the damage to my home. I'd already called my lawyer before I even unpacked my truck. My lawyer picked up on the first ring. I didn't even finish the full story before he interrupted me and said, "Get every document, every photo, every video, and send it to me now." That's exactly what I did. I forwarded the auction flyers, the fake foreclosure paperwork, and the video Mr. Jensen had recorded. I even included photos of my damaged barn, the messed up lock, and the tire tracks all over my yard. My lawyer didn't even hesitate. "This isn't just HOA overreach," he said. "This is fraud. And possibly attempted theft." While I was still on the phone, Karen had finally started backing off. She stopped waving her clipboard, stopped barking orders at everyone, and started looking around like she realized, for the first time, this whole thing was falling apart. Her confidence cracked. She tried to tell the officers that the auction was just exploratory, like it hadn't really happened. But the brochures, sign-in sheets, and deposit slips told a different story. One buyer had even written a check for $5,000 deposit. That wasn't exploratory, that was criminal. A few hours later, the crowd was gone. The tents came down. Officers gave me their incident report number and promised follow-up. Karen disappeared without another word. But the damage had already been done, and I wasn't about to sit quietly while someone tried to erase me from my own land. The next day, I drove into town and met with my lawyer in person. He had already started drafting a cease and desist letter for the HOA and was preparing a civil suit. I asked him what the chances were of holding Karen personally responsible. He smirked. "Oh, I'm not just going after the HOA. If she forged documents, made false statements to police, and used fake authority to trespass, we're going after her directly too." I liked the sound of that. Back at the ranch, I started doing my own digging. I went through every HOA letter, every dues notice, every document they'd ever sent me. I found out Karen had been elected HOA president only a year ago, and since then, she'd rewritten the bylaws. She slipped in new rules about asset reclamation and abandonment protocols, that no one in the neighborhood even remembered voting on. She'd quietly built a system that gave her control, on paper at least, over properties she claimed were non-compliant. I spoke with a few neighbors and, surprise surprise, I wasn't the first person she'd targeted. One guy had his RV towed without warning. Another had been fined $800 for parking his trailer on his own driveway. Most people just paid the fines to avoid trouble. Karen had made herself judge, jury, and enforcer. But nobody had pushed back. Until now. Mr. Jensen helped me collect even more evidence. Turns out he had taken pictures of Karen handing out bidding paddles. Someone else in the neighborhood had a video of her speech at the auction, where she talked about taking back control of neglected properties. She actually stood on a crate and gave a full speech, like she was a politician. She even used a microphone and thanked everyone for coming. That part really made my lawyer's eyes light up. She recorded herself committing fraud, he said, shaking his head. This just keeps getting better, for us. I filed formal charges that week. Fraud, trespassing, destruction of property, illegal entry, you name it. We included everything. My lawyer also requested a temporary restraining order against Karen and her board, keeping them from setting foot on my property again. The judge approved it within 24 hours. But even after all that, what shocked me most was the reaction from the rest of the HOA board. 3 of them reached out privately to apologize. One said he didn't even know about the auction. Another said Karen handled everything herself and just told the board it was routine enforcement. It became clear that she had been operating solo, using the HOA as a shield. A few neighbors even started talking about removing her from the board entirely. I told them I wasn't interested in apologies, I wanted accountability. I wanted every dollar she'd collected from fake fines returned. I wanted repairs paid for. And I wanted everyone to know she wasn't just a bossy neighbor with a clipboard. She was a con artist who used her position to try and steal what didn't belong to her. News about what happened spread faster than I expected. By the end of the week, half the town had heard about Karen's property auction scandal. Local gossip pages were full of comments. Some people were shocked, others weren't surprised at all. A few even shared their own bad experiences with her. Turns out, she'd made enemies before, but no one had ever taken her to court. That changed with me. The restraining order went into effect immediately. She wasn't allowed within 200 feet of my ranch. I printed out the order and taped a copy to my gate, just in case she forgot. For the first time in weeks, I slept with both eyes closed. But I wasn't done. My lawyer had filed formal charges, and we were just getting started on the civil lawsuit. When someone tries to steal your land, you don't walk away. You show up in court and make sure they never forget it. Meanwhile, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. I didn't go, I wasn't about to sit in a folding chair and listen to excuses. But I heard all about it. Karen tried to explain herself. She claimed she misunderstood the authority granted to her under the HOA bylaws. She said she thought she had legal grounds. That she was only trying to protect the neighborhood's value. But the board wasn't buying it anymore. 2 members resigned right after the meeting. One of them emailed me privately and said, "I didn't sign up for this. I'm sorry for what she put you through." Others pushed for a vote to remove her completely. I wasn't part of that process, but I got word later that week. Karen was officially out. Removed from the board. Stripped of all HOA privileges. And she wasn't going quietly either. She threatened to sue them all for defamation. Classic Karen move. What shocked me more, though, was what we discovered during the legal discovery process. My lawyer subpoenaed her email records and HOA communications. And that's when everything really came together. She had been targeting properties for months. Not just mine. She'd made a spreadsheet of potential foreclosures, listing homes where the owners were elderly, traveling, or simply didn't attend HOA meetings. She labeled them as low resistance. That hit hard. This wasn't some random misunderstanding. She had a plan. A system. She called it restoring balance to the neighborhood. I called it predatory. One of the houses on her list belonged to a couple in their 80s who were away visiting grandkids. Karen had already mailed out notice of violation letters to them too. If I hadn't caught her when I did, she probably would have tried auctioning their place next. That realization made me feel even stronger about pressing charges. It wasn't just about me anymore. This was about stopping someone before they could do even more damage. The case started picking up steam. My lawyer worked fast. Karen's legal team tried to downplay everything, called it an overstep, technical error. But the judge wasn't buying it, especially not with that auction video. That clip of her smiling in front of a banner that read, "Ranch Property Auction, today at 2 p.m.? Yeah, that didn't exactly scream innocent mistake. As the case moved forward, more neighbors came forward. A woman down the street said Karen threatened to fine her $1,000 for painting her fence the wrong shade of beige. A single dad said Karen tried to ban his daughter's lemonade stand because it violated vendor rules. All of these stories added up, piece by piece, until everyone could see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about one bad day. This was about a person who used fake rules to control good people. I'd never planned on becoming the guy who exposed an HOA tyrant. But I guess sometimes life hands you a clipboard-wielding Karen, and you've got no choice but to fight back. My ranch was my home, my land, my peace. And no one, not even someone with fake authority and a list of made-up rules, was going to take that from me. If you made it this far, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories coming, real ones, from people who've had enough of power-hungry HOAs, nosy neighbors, and twisted lies. You won't believe what some of them tried to get away with. The funny thing about power is how quickly it crumbles when someone finally stands up to it. After Karen was removed from the HOA board, it was like a light switch flipped in the neighborhood. People started speaking up. Stories that had been whispered in garages or quietly exchanged at mailboxes were suddenly being shared out loud. It was like everyone had been waiting for someone to draw the line, and once it happened, nobody wanted to be silent anymore. One neighbor, Marcus, came over one morning with a folder in his hand. He was quiet, a bit awkward, but I could tell something was bothering him. He handed me the folder and said, "This is what she sent me last fall. Said I owed $600 for fence damage caused by a storm." I opened it. Inside were photos of a fence panel that had clearly been rotting for years, next to a letter that said he'd be fined if he didn't replace it by a certain date. Marcus told me the fence didn't even belong to him, it was on HOA-maintained land. He tried arguing, but Karen had shut him down and threatened legal action. Another neighbor, Rachel, said Karen sent her multiple violation notices for having too many guests at her house during the holidays. Rachel's parents had visited for Christmas. That's it. Karen told her it violated a new parking clause, even though her guests parked on her own driveway. Rachel showed me the letters. Same tone. Same threats. Always just intimidating enough to scare someone into submission, but not quite illegal, at least not until she tried to sell someone's land. It became more than just my case. My lawyer began gathering statements from these neighbors, compiling a file that painted a much larger picture. It showed Karen as someone who had used her role to bully, intimidate, and control everyone around her. And worst of all, she knew exactly what she was doing. Everything was carefully worded, wrapped in the illusion of authority, and backed by people too tired or too scared to fight back. Until now. My civil lawsuit moved forward quickly, especially after the judge saw the fake auction documents and the video of Karen hosting the event like she was selling off estate jewelry instead of someone's land. But what made it even worse for her was the discovery of a second fake auction in the works. Yep, while she was planning the one for my ranch, she had also scheduled another one for a nearby vacant lot. The owners lived out of state and had no idea what was happening. My lawyer contacted them. When they found out, they were furious and joined the case with me. Every day seemed to uncover another layer. Karen had used her position to handpick properties she thought were easy targets. She'd send fake violation letters, claim non-compliance, and then push for quick auctions, always while the owners were gone or distracted. She relied on fear, confusion, and people not knowing their rights. But that stopped once we brought everything to light. Meanwhile, back on my ranch, things were slowly returning to normal. I fixed the damage to my barn. I replaced the locks on every gate and installed cameras around the property. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted every inch of my land protected moving forward. I wasn't taking chances anymore. The best part? Some of the same people who had been too nervous to speak up were now walking over to check in. One even brought me cookies. Another offered to help fix my fence. It felt like the neighborhood had gone through a weird kind of detox. Like a storm had ripped through, pulled up all the rotten roots, and left behind something clearer. Karen, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. Word got around that she'd lawyered up and was trying to cut a deal to avoid trial. But after everything she'd done, no one felt sorry for her. Not after the forged documents, the lies, the damage, and the complete lack of remorse. She hadn't just crossed a line, she erased it completely. And just so you know, if you're still watching and shaking your head at how deep this went, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's plenty more where this came from. Real stories, real people, and more outrageous HOA madness that'll leave your jaw on the floor. I didn't expect the legal process to move fast, but with the amount of evidence we had, things started to roll. Karen's lawyer kept trying to stall, requesting extensions, dodging paperwork, and pretending everything was a misunderstanding. But the judge wasn't buying it. Each time we showed up in court, we had more emails, photos, videos, and even audio recordings from HOA meetings where she made wild claims about her authority. It was becoming harder for her to hide behind excuses. One recording really sealed the mood in the courtroom. In it, she actually told the board that most homeowners won't fight back, and that, as long as things look official, no one questions them. You could hear her laughing. It was chilling. The judge's face didn't move much, but you could feel the temperature in the room shift when that clip played. She wasn't just overstepping, she was manipulating the system with a smile on her face. By now, the Homeowners Association was scrambling. With Karen off the board, they started trying to clean up the mess. They issued public statements, promised new transparency rules, and even called for an emergency vote to elect new leadership. I didn't go to that vote, but Mr. Jensen did. He said it was the first time the meeting was packed. Every seat taken. People who hadn't shown up in years came just to make sure someone like Karen never got close to power again. Still, while the HOA tried to save face, Karen wasn't done making noise. Her lawyer filed a motion claiming the entire auction had been symbolic, that no money had exchanged hands, and that my property was never truly at risk. But we had the deposit slips, the bank records. We even had a copy of the fake, bank-owned document she had emailed to one of the bidders. It had a logo that didn't even match the real bank's branding. My lawyer said it looked like something cut and pasted off a Google image search. And then came the depositions. When Karen had to sit in front of attorneys and answer questions under oath, the story started to fall apart fast. She couldn't keep her lies straight. One minute she said she had board approval, the next minute she said she acted alone for the good of the community. She tried to blame a former treasurer, then said she misunderstood a legal article online. The more she talked, the worse it got. She even admitted that she never read the HOA's own governing documents all the way through. But here's the kicker. During one of those depositions, she let it slip that she had been watching my property long before I went on vacation. She said something like, "Well, it looked empty most days, and I didn't think anyone lived there full-time." That was the moment my lawyer leaned over and whispered, "She just admitted intent." Because if she knew I lived there, and still went through with the auction plan, it showed that this wasn't just confusion or a slip-up. It was deliberate. More neighbors joined the civil suit. 3 homes, all marked as abandoned by Karen, had also received fake warning letters. Each case had something in common. She waited until the owner was away, sent 1 or 2 notices to the wrong address, then declared the home in violation and lined up a sale. It was a formula. Cold, calculated, and repeated. The HOA was now in full damage control mode. They brought in an outside law firm to audit every past decision Karen had signed off on. Fines were being reviewed. Fees were being refunded. One family even had their dues waived for the next year because of the emotional distress she'd caused them. They were thankful but still angry, and rightfully so. As for my own case, the judge agreed there was enough evidence to move forward with the full trial. And let's just say, Karen's lawyer started looking a whole lot less confident after that ruling. My legal team was solid, and the facts were stacked in our favor. And hey, if you're enjoying watching Karen's house of lies slowly collapse, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. I've got more coming. Because once one HOA tyrant falls, others tend to get real nervous. The day of the full trial finally came, and I'll be honest, I was nervous. Not because I didn't think we had the evidence, but because it was still surreal that we had to go this far. I was sitting in a courtroom to defend my own ranch, the land I owned outright, because someone decided their clipboard and a title gave them more power than the law itself. But I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every neighbor Karen had tried to silence, fine, or bully into submission. Karen sat across the room from me with her lawyer, flipping through papers and trying not to make eye contact. She wasn't her usual loud self anymore. No confident smirk. No fake politeness. Just silence. Maybe it was finally sinking in that this time, the rules she bent were real laws, and the consequences weren't going away. The prosecution opened with a bang. They laid out the timeline, showed the auction flyers, the fake bank documents, and even projected the video of her handing out bidding paddles right there in my driveway. The judge leaned forward, arms crossed, not saying much, but watching every detail. Then came the emails. One in particular stood out. Karen had sent it to one of the other board members and actually wrote, "Once this auction goes through, we can shift the ranch property into more profitable use for the HOA." That line got read out loud, and I swear, the whole courtroom went still. Then it was time for witness testimony. Mr. Jensen went first. Calm, respectful, and clear. He told the court what he saw that day. People walking across my land, someone setting up a speaker system, Karen directing cars like she was running a school fundraiser. Then he pulled out his phone and played the video again, the same one he showed me weeks earlier. Karen's voice echoed in the courtroom as she welcomed everyone to the auction. Her words, "Today marks a new step for our community, one where we reclaim lost spaces and restore order." Reclaim lost spaces? My house wasn't lost. I was just out of town. My lawyer presented every receipt, photo, and document we had. He showed the court my automatic payment confirmations for HOA dues, my clean record of property taxes, and even a notarized letter from the bank confirming I had no liens or mortgage activity. There was no missed payment. No foreclosure. No legal excuse. Just a woman with too much time, too little oversight, and a dangerous ego. Karen's lawyer did their best to spin it. They claimed she misunderstood the foreclosure process. That she thought HOA boards had more authority than they actually did. That she acted in good faith, based on what she thought was her duty. But it didn't land. Not after the forged signatures. Not after the fake property status sheets. Not after the audio of her planning future auctions like she was managing a real estate empire. And then came my turn to speak. I stood up, looked at the judge, and explained how I came home early from a family trip and found strangers walking across the property I had spent years working for. I described how it felt to be told I didn't belong on my own land. How it felt to be called a trespasser. To watch someone else try to sell the place where I grew up branding cattle, fixing fences, and burying my old dog under the oak tree. I wasn't emotional. I didn't yell. But I told the truth. And that truth landed harder than any argument Karen's side could throw. After my testimony, the judge paused and asked one single question to the defense. "Do you deny that the auction took place on property you now admit the defendant owns?" Her lawyer hesitated. "No, Your Honor," he said. That was it. You could feel the case shifting right there. The judge allowed closing arguments, but at that point, it was mostly for formality. We all knew where this was heading. But what made it even better was what happened after the trial broke for the day. A couple from the back of the room came up to me. Strangers. They said, "We've been watching this story unfold. We had our own run-in with a different HOA last year. Seeing you fight back gives us hope." That's when I realized this wasn't just about Karen. This was bigger. A message. A reminder that when you stand your ground, even against fake authority, even when it feels like no one's on your side, you're not alone. And if you're still with me on this wild journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because I've got more to share, and you won't believe what happened next. The verdict didn't come immediately. The judge said he needed time to review everything, which was fair. After all, we had dropped a mountain of evidence. But waiting didn't feel easy. Every hour ticked by like a drumbeat in my chest. I'd walk out onto my porch, look over the fields, and remember how close I came to losing all of it. Not to some financial hardship or legal mistake, but to a woman who thought she could rewrite the law just because she had a title on her name tag. Neighbors kept checking in. Some brought coffee. Others brought their own HOA documents, asking if I could help them review weird letters or fines they'd received. It was like my case had opened the floodgates, and people were finally realizing they didn't have to stay quiet just to keep the peace. One neighbor, Luis, told me his kid had been fined $250 by the HOA for biking too close to the sidewalk edge. That fine had sat unpaid for months because Luis thought it would just go away. Karen had tacked interest onto it without his knowledge and tried to report him for delinquency. My lawyer added it to our growing pile of HOA abuse examples. Then something happened that I didn't expect. I got a call from a reporter. Apparently, someone from the courtroom had passed along details about the case. The reporter said she was working on a story about HOA abuse across the country, and mine was one of the wildest she'd heard. At first, I didn't want to deal with it. I wasn't looking for attention, just justice. But the more we talked, the more I realized that my story could actually help people understand what unchecked HOA power can do. I gave her what I had. Documents, quotes, timelines. She asked if I'd go on record. I said yes. A week later, the article went live. The headline read, "He came home to find his ranch being auctioned by the HOA while he still owned it." It went viral in less than 48 hours. My phone lit up with messages from people all across the country. Some shared their own HOA horror stories, illegal fines, threats of foreclosure, petty board members acting like landlords. Others just said thank you. One woman wrote, "I thought I was crazy for thinking our HOA was abusing power. Your story gave me courage to speak up." Even better? The story caught the attention of a state representative. He reached out to my lawyer and asked for more information. Said he'd been pushing for stronger laws to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. He asked if he could reference my case in his proposal. I said, "Please do. Because if Karen's mess could spark real change, then at least something good would come out of all this." Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, Karen wasn't showing her face anymore. Her house was quiet, blinds drawn, car rarely seen. I heard she was trying to sell the place, but buyers were backing out once they learned about the lawsuit. Nobody wanted to buy a house with that much drama attached. Her name had become a warning around town, especially in real estate circles. But even though the courtroom drama had slowed, I wasn't done. We filed for restitution. Every dollar I spent fixing the damage. Every day of missed work. Every legal fee. We wanted it all covered. And we had the paperwork to back it up. Karen's lawyer tried to fight it, but the judge allowed our claim to move forward. A few days later, I got a certified letter from the court. Inside was the ruling. I'll tell you exactly what it said in the next part of the story, but before we go there, do me a quick favor. If you've been following this saga, if you've ever dealt with someone who pushed too far just because they thought they could, hit that subscribe button. You're not just watching a story. You're part of a growing voice of people who've had enough of fake power and real consequences. I held that envelope in my hands for a full minute before I opened it. The weight of everything that had happened, every violation, every fake document, every humiliating moment when I was called a trespasser on my own land, sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't sure what I expected. A win would feel good, sure, but part of me still couldn't believe I had to fight this battle in the first place. When I finally tore it open and unfolded the judge's decision, it was like flipping on a light in a dark room. Every point we made had been acknowledged. Every piece of evidence had been reviewed. The court found that Karen had acted outside the legal authority of the HOA, had knowingly forged documents to simulate foreclosure, had falsely claimed ownership interest in private property, and had misled third parties into participating in a fraudulent auction. The judge's words were clear. Asterisk, the court finds the defendant's actions to be willful, deceptive, and harmful to both the plaintiff and the greater community. That one sentence made every sleepless night worth it. The ruling came with consequences. Karen was ordered to pay full restitution, including the cost of repairs to my barn, rekeying all the locks on my property, legal expenses, lost wages, and additional damages for emotional distress. She also had to issue a formal written apology, not because I needed one, but because it was court-mandated. And honestly, that was probably the most painful part for her. I received the apology letter 2 days later. It was typed, formal, and stiff. No warmth, no sincerity, just cold words she was forced to write. She admitted fault, acknowledged that she had overstepped her role, and stated she would no longer participate in any HOA-related activities. It was more like a confession than an apology. But it was on paper. Filed. After the ruling, things around the neighborhood shifted again. People started showing up to HOA meetings. No more empty chairs and rushed votes. Suddenly, everyone cared. They wanted to know what rules really existed, what powers the board actually had, and how to make sure something like this never happened again. The bylaws were rewritten, this time with real oversight. Term limits were added. Transparency requirements put in place. And one clause was highlighted in bold. Asterisk, no board member may take unilateral action against a property without documented legal approval and majority board vote. You could thank Karen for that. Even people outside our neighborhood paid attention. That article from before? It sparked a series of follow-up stories. Local news stations picked it up. Then national ones. I even got a call from a production company asking if they could adapt the story for a documentary. I didn't say yes right away. I wasn't looking to become famous. I just wanted peace on my land and accountability for what happened. But the idea that my fight could help thousands of others? That was hard to ignore. One moment that really hit me came a week after the court's decision. A couple I'd never met before drove up to my ranch gate. They were older, probably in their 70s. They said they'd read the story online, and they just wanted to shake my hand. Their son had lost his home 5 years earlier because of a rogue HOA in a different state. They said no one listened back then. But seeing someone fight and win? It gave them closure. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a ranch or a power-hungry HOA president. It was about all of us. About standing up when you're cornered. About pushing back when someone decides they can rewrite the rules just because no one ever stopped them before. And while I may have started this journey just wanting to protect what was mine, it became something more than that. A reminder to everyone watching, don't ever assume the people in charge know what they're doing. Question the clipboard. Read the fine print. Protect your space. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you've been here with me through this wild story, watching it unfold step by step, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There are more stories out there just like this one. And trust me, some of them? Even crazier.